Welcome to the New York Times Popcast, your rainbow cookie without the chocolate of music, news, and criticism. I'm your host, John Caramonica.
This is not the end of the world. This is an invitation to dance.
You kids ready to rave? Let's rave. I'm zooted off the Bang energy drink, cotton candy flavor, because we're here to talk about the big things on the dance floor. If you have been paying attention to nightlife and club culture in the last couple of years, you certainly know about Fred again. That may be a good thing. It might be a bad thing, TBQH, depending how you look at it. But Fred again has become one of the most signature producers working today, has had a string of really thoughtful albums over the last couple of years, and has been making friends all over the spectrum. And so today we're going to talk about the rise of Fred again, what it means for dance music. We're talking about it with Foster Kamer, a.k.a. Feck Money, a.k.a. the best media critic not working as a media critic, who profiled Fred for the paper last year. Foster, in the Zach Bryan t-shirt, so you know it's real.
Repping hard.
Foster, welcome to Popcast.
First time. Pleasure. Super excited. Been looking forward to this.
Okay, I want to get the harsh stuff out of the way right off rip. I like Fred again, okay?
Yeah.
I do. We wouldn't be here if I didn't. Sometimes I do listen to Fred again and think it's giving Moby's Play.
Yeah, he's very divisive. He's much more divisive among the music critic community than the electronic music community, I would say. But he is divisive.
Again, I don't say that as a disqualifier. Moby's Play, a very popular album, a very, very successful album. But there is something about the relationship between the production and the vocals that I found unsettling back then in that era, and I do sometimes find unsettling about Fred again and Fred again's music. I'm not trying to open negative. I just had to get it out of the way, because sometimes my brain stops working when the caffeine fades, and then I lose all the gems. So we're just going to get that gem out on record.
Okay, sure.
Fred again is a disciple / protege of Brian Eno, which I think is worth starting the conversation with. Can you tell me a little bit about, from your conversation with Fred, their relationship and the balance that he was striking before setting out on his own between working for other musicians, but also kind of being schooled by Brian Eno as like a very distinct kind of musician coming from a different perspective than a lot of the collaborators that Fred was working with previously, Ed Sheeran, et cetera, et cetera.
I had no idea about this, but Brian Eno has these a cappella sessions at his house. And one of Fred's friends was a neighbor of Brian Eno's and invited Fred over to one of these a cappella sessions. And the a cappella sessions, it's just people singing. And he brings over neighbors. Sometimes he'll bring over other singers. Paul McCartney was in one session at one point. And Fred, was a musician in the presence of Brian Eno. He would do anything. He would be happy being a gopher. So at one point he was just handing out song sheets. And then he started, working boards with Brian Eno, working soundboards, playing around in Logic, which is a music production software that Fred has mastered. And it's kind of like a difficult, slightly more archaic one that not a lot of musicians use. And it has a very distinct feel to it. And Brian Eno was really taken by that and impressed by that. So over time, Fred spends enough time with Brian Eno. And eventually Brian Eno is working on an album with Carl Hyde, one of the two members of Underworld, who you all might know from the famous song Born Slippy, which was on the Trainspotting soundtrack in the 90s. It's like one of the most legendary electronic songs in the 90s. So Fred's first production credits and songwriting credits were on that Brian Eno and Carl Hyde album. From there, I believe it was Brian Eno's manager who also managed Roots Manuva at the time. So those guys met.
Shout out Roots Manuva. Shout out Big Dada. Shout out Will Action. Okay.
Shout out Roots. And so Fred's, I think one of his first production credits outside of Brian Eno was with Roots. And from there, he started making music, songwriting. One gig leads to another. And before you know it, he is working with Ed Sheeran on the album that Bad Habits is on. And he's one of the credited songwriters on Bad Habits. And he worked with Ellie Goulding, a couple other people too. He's like a bona fide songwriter. I'm going very quickly through his songwriting career.
I do think that is really important context for what we're going to end up arriving at. And of course, a lot of people who exist in the space that we're talking about now never break out of that space or never have an idea or a conceptual approach that's somehow bigger than the type of labor that they're contributing to other people's work. What was he doing during that time that helped set the table for him to kind of like have the signature innovation that has landed us where we're landing now?
There was something that Brian Eno actually did that got him there. It was two things, really. One, Brian Eno has all of these ambient sounds. You know, he made like that music for airports, and he's made a lot of those ambient albums, and he has these just thousands of files of just ambient noises. And one of kind of Brian Eno's exercises, and Brian Eno is very good at delivering creative exercises. You know, he's got that deck of cards, oblique strategies, and they're absurd creative prompts. But, you know, he gave Fred this creative prompt in the form of these thousands of ambient music files and said, just take one, use it, stick with it, and make a song.
Build something.
Don't think twice. Build something around it. Yeah. And he had gotten to kind of this, like, around the time of the Ed Sheeran stuff, I think like this creatively fallow place. I think he was just in the process, in the modality of being that songwriter, being that in that position that a lot of artists don't get out of. And he called Brian Eno to me a wizened cliff pusher. He said that Brian Eno basically said, you have to stop making music for other people and start making your own. And that is what happened. Another thing that happened was the pandemic that put Fred at home with some of these ideas that he'd started to develop over the last like year and a half. He had nothing else to do. It's not like he was working with songwriters, writing a bunch of songs at the time. He was really trying to focus on his own stuff, and it proved pretty inspirational in that moment. That is how Actual Life 1 comes about.
There's Actual Life 2, Actual Life 3. I mean, then there's like spin-offs and piano versions and one-off singles and collaborations. There's a lot of music. He's put out a lot of music. So let's listen to something off of the first Actual Life. Let's listen to Kyle, I Found You.
I found you. Your head shakes out your heart. You're pulling yourself apart. With sweat bleeding down, I found you. Hey, I found you.
So the Fred Again proposition is a found or recontextualized vocal using some of, I imagine, the technique he's picking up from Eno, but also from a distance. I remember when I first engaged Fred Again, from a distance, if you're not looking closely, it could just be conventional club records. Like there's some, not all of them, but there's a not insignificant part of the catalog that could just from far away function just like any number of like club music that like highbrow, highfalutin folks might look down on and say, that's not very intricate. That's not very complicated. Da, da, da. There's a thickness, I find, to the production, a complexity that doesn't, I think there's a quote in your piece, maybe it's from Kieran. It just feels deeply refreshing, isn't hidden away, and isn't super mysterious.
And he makes it look easy.
Yeah. It's interesting coming from Fortet, who like, I think, certainly early in the career was like perfectly happy to be mysterious.
Yeah. And now still is to some extent.
But now he's DJing Madison Square Garden alongside Fred, and Skrillex. Fred is not afraid of a musical directness, and I think relatedly an emotional immediacy.
Yes. And I did use the word emotional a few times in the piece, and I kind of regret using it because all music comes from a place of emotion in one way or another. I think maybe the more accurate way to say it would be like it's electronic music that's a lot more in its feelings than a lot of other electronic music. And it's also very narratively driven. He's very much telling stories about his life. Actual Life 1 was written around the time one of his friends was very sick, and also during the pandemic. And you can hear that story in the record. And a lot of electronic music doesn't necessarily have that level of storytelling. Certainly, Fortet and Skrillex, another collaborator of theirs, doesn't necessarily tell that story, at least not in a linear or explicit way. And Fred's music does.
He's using the found vocals as a substitute for his own personal narrative.
He's using them to drive his personal narrative. And he is also singing over those found vocals too. So he's taking them on in his own voice. There's a real texture there, to your point, that doesn't exist across the spectrum of a lot of electronic music. Now, if you want to get to knocks about Fred, we can dip in here for a sec.
Yeah.
one of the things I first heard when I was telling people about this was, oh yeah, well, the Range did that back when. The Range is an electronic artist.
Yo, shout out the Range. I haven't talked about the Range in a minute. Yeah.
A fantastic couple records, a brilliant producer and musician who definitely picked up a lot of clips from the internet and used them, but in much more abstract, less explicit, less storytelling oriented ways. Fred's use of them was really, to Portet's point, straightforward and non-mysterious.
I like a lot of immediate, direct music that doesn't hide. I like plenty of music like that. I think the tug of war that I was so struck by when listening to Fred was like, I know I'm supposed to have an immediate gut reaction to this because of the subject matter of the vocal and because of how the vocal is treated, the textures and the kind of whatever filters are being applied to it or whatever, what distortions and whatnot. But everything underneath that is telling me to abandon and be free and be loose and not live up here, not live above the eyebrow. That's a very, very challenging thing. You mentioned the Range. I do think it's a slightly different version of this, but like the Blaze, I think on the first Blaze project is also very similar, where like on a gut level, like on a hitting you in the sternum level, it's moving fast. It's all about bodily freedom. But once you get into what they're singing and how they're singing, all you're doing is having this like intense mental, emotional, like you're being yanked. And it's an abstract way to talk about music, but I do think Fred as a producer is extremely good at not sacrificing one of those for the other, but rather finding an accretive solution that keeps both those trains on the track at the same time.
That's a great way of putting it. He is good at demonstrating both of those modalities in separate situations. He's good at showing the full range, if you will, of what he can do in the various channels he operates in, that he combines on the albums in performances, certainly in concert. Hit your feet and hit your hips.
Let's talk a little bit about the first Actual Life. Where are these sound clips? I mean, I know where they're coming from, but tell us where they're coming from, because he's pulling them from a bunch of different places.
A lot of them came from YouTube. One was from this slam poet, which it's been forever since I've thought about slam poetry. The Fred Again album was the first time I thought about slam poetry since like Def Poetry Jam. There's a callback. So
Peace to Saul Williams.
Peace to Saul Williams. Yeah. So YouTube slam poet, a guy busking on the streets of Paris, taken from his Instagram live. That's Dermot Kennedy and Dermot, See Yourself in My Eyes. That's the third track. A singer Fred found online. They got talking and she sent Fred a video. That's Yasmina. Julia Michaels, a singer who did a spoken word piece that was taken from her Instagram. Amine, the rapper, taken from his freestyle on Double XL's YouTube channel. One of the samples is from his roommate, Big Hen, who's in Joy Anonymous, who opened for him on tour. They're great. If you like Fred, you'll probably like Joy Anonymous. And a poem by another poet, Ebony Stewart. One that's like one of my favorite samples on the album is from this poet named Sabrina Benan. And it is such a dark, anxious, intense poem that he turns into this incredible beat.
We should listen to that. That's Sabrina, I Am a Party. Yeah,
yes.
Let's listen to a little bit of that.
I am a party inside of my head, inside of my house. So I don't want to go. I am a party.
So the important thing to take away from this list that you're describing is this is not, and I want to emphasize this for folks who aren't super familiar with what Fred does. This is not, I send you a beat, you send me back something you've done to that beat. This is not like you sing over the producing that I've done, you rap to it. This is something different. This is identifying a vocal sample or a piece of a composition, resonating with it content-wise or spiritually, melting it into a shape that makes sense for Fred's production, and then building that around that. Is that an apt description of his process?
Apt description. And we haven't even gotten to the samples from more established people. There's one on Actual Life 2 that is a Kodak Black Instagram Live freestyle. I have no idea how he found this, because Instagram Live is so kind of ethereal. It's there and then it disappears. And the rest of that Kodak Black freestyle is very family unfriendly, except for the like 5-second piece that Fred took and turned into this mournful, LJ, just beautiful little piece of music. And he's also used other rappers as well.
All right, let's actually listen to this Kodak Black song. It's called Kahan Last Year. Kodak and Fred again.
You were in my life last year. You were in my life last year.
I was on my mind,
Often I find myself as a listener returning to specific moments in unexpected songs where I almost couldn't even tell you what happened 30 seconds after that moment, but there's something about a turn of phrase, a tone, a texture of voice that really hits in a very specific way. And almost like I can't unhear it. I can't unfeel it. Given that, and given that I feel like I experience music like that, like I feel like I understand Fred's approach, which is we're surrounded by sound all the time, right? And like we carry things, like you carry things like how like a loved one might have said something to you or like overheard something on the street. Like you carry those things with you. I don't know. All I can do when something that like that happens to me is like replay it in my head and maybe tell someone about it. But he, because of his skill set and because of his passion, like can do it to the next level. And I wonder when you talk to him about listening, like the act of listening, what did he say about how he approached listening? Because to me, that's like the unspoken compositional skill on this record is the listening that has to happen before you ever make a choice about what kind of song you're going to make.
It's listening and watching because a lot of these clips came from YouTube. He's looking at the emotional resonance, but in terms of hearing it, you have to remember that Fred's classically trained. And so when he hears a phrase, a sentence, whether it's from a poem or like a piece of a song or even like an a cappella freestyle, he's hearing it in key. In the same way some people have synesthesia and they, like Pharrell, hears, sees color. Fred hears and immediately correlates it with the musical note, pitch, and key. And from there, I'm sure in his mind, as he's looking and hearing, he has all these ambient samples in the back of his head, these thousands of ambient samples, these canvases that he's been given or uses, and he can match one thing to the other and can't get that out of his head. And that's how the song starts.
Truly couldn't be me. Unlike John Bareilles, my colleague, who has perfect pitch as a former piano player, or maybe current piano player, and who I once saw taking notes at a concert in musical notation.
Stop. Oh, God.
Not an exaggeration. I was sitting next to him at Joe's Pub. This was like 100 years ago. I can't remember what the show was. I was there for pleasure and he was there to work. Like he was reviewing. I can't remember the show. And I sort of like looked at him scribbling in his notepad, sort of like, what is the great John Bareilles? Like, what is he seeing that I can't see? What is he hearing that I can't hear? And he's writing in musical notation. And I was like, I haven't read music since I was a senior in high school. Like, I don't even know what the hell he's doing. Anyway, JP.
He's flexing on you.
Yeah,
that's what
absolutely.
He's doing.
Absolutely. And an icon. I'm literally about to donate my high school trombone because I just can't even look at it anymore. I don't even want, like, it's too embarrassing. No, but anyway, JP probably really into Fred again. I should ask him, actually. Probably really into Fred again. When did the stuff start to take off? Do you feel like the first album, like the original Actual Life, did what it was supposed to do? Or was it, to me, it was Actual Life 2 where it started to really resonate for me and get to me. But what was happening off that first album that got him the momentum going?
Super important to know here is that Fred was taking off overseas, specifically in London, England, before America in a big way. Also, the album got dropped earlier there than it did here, I believe. The first time I had heard of it, it was because Pitchfork founder Ryan Schreiber briefly had a newsletter where he was dropping new music on people, and I saw it in his newsletter. And it was, I think it might have been I Found You or We've Lost Dancing, which features Chicago house legend Blessed Madonna, a conversation with her that he looped into a song that if you've seen Triangle of Sadness, the movie, it's the song that Triangle of Sadness ends with. Fun fact. I'd heard it then, and then Rami Madley Croft from the XX put out her first solo single at the end of 2020 called Lifetime, and I saw that Fred had produced it. And that was kind of the second big Fred headline outside of this album is making waves overseas and starting to catch a little here. Plus, he's doing that production work. And then you look and you go, oh my God, this is the guy behind Bad Habits. This man knows an earworm. And from there, Actual Life 2 comes out in 2021. that album didn't necessarily have the full totality of like viral singles like We've Lost Dancing and I Found You that Actual Life 1 did. But the Kodak Black sample on there, a couple other tracks, hit well. But really, it was when the USB EP started to come out, to trickle out. And there are a few songs on there, like Lights Out, which he did with Rami, and also an Australian DJ named Hi, who is an absolutely phenomenal producer that they took from a Going to Be XX song that Rami was working on. That was its own single. It hit. Turn Out the Lights with Future and Swedish House Mafia.
Swedish House Mafia.
That one hit. And that is an incredible song. I mean, less emotional, Fred. How do you feel about that one? You have feelings.
Yeah, I'm mixed on it, but more because I have a certain anxiety about the way that Future either has been deployed or is deploying himself in the last like 2 or 3 years. It's starting to feel a little parodic. And I feel like the Fred Again approach to Future tends to underscore the potential self-parody of what Future is becoming.
That's fair.
If you look at Future circa 2015, 2016, like every kind of like self-loathing or self-affirming moment had that sort of like hollow, sad texture to it. And you just felt like you never heard anything like that before. By 2020 or 2021, it's feeling like we're kind of grinding to a halt. So like this song was maybe not my favorite. We should listen to it though. It's called Turn on the Lights Again, featuring Future with Fred Again and Swedish House Mafia. 2 great tastes that are together and maybe taste great depending. We will be back in a second. We're back. We're talking Fred Again. We're talking emotional dance music with Foster Kamer. This is probably a good moment for us to talk about Strange Bedfellows. Part of the Fred Again compositional process, certainly as he's become more successful, certainly you see this more on Actual Life 3 and beyond. Everybody likes this guy. Seems. Like, I mean, music, like the music community. He seems to make friends very easily, which I know is like a goofy thing to say, but people seem to want to work with him. He seems capable of putting people together who maybe would not otherwise be together. I know they're not necessarily all in the same room, but to do it in a way where everybody signs off on it and says, sure, I'd love to be on a song with this person or that person or whatever. There is some kind of talent that he has that is not purely a production talent and not purely an ear and not purely compositional.
Oh, I have thoughts on this.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because to me, that might be, I don't want to say it's his biggest gift, but it's up there.
It's part of the magic. Okay.
Let's talk about
the
that.
closest analog. You ready?
Yeah.
Jack Antonoff. And I'll tell you, what the thing is. I've spoken with a bunch of artists who have worked with Fred. I've spoken with Fortet. I've talked to Brian, I've talked to Rami Madley Croft. The thing seems to be, he's a fun hang. He's a fun hang. And when you're with him,
He's a solid hang.
He's a solid hang. He's a super nice guy. And the feeling is that when you are with him, the pressure of making a song, the pressure of making art that artists put on themselves, it's massive. But somebody who can put you in a mode of, we're just having a really good time. And you're very comfortable to try new things and go where you haven't gone before and not be self-conscious about it. I think that is a real commonality between Fred and Jack in terms of what they can get out of talent. And obviously, Fred has his own musical signatures, and so does Jack as well. But the magnetism of them as just human beings and the level of comfort that they bring to artists, I think, is something that a lot of really, truly legendary producers have. I mean, we've all laughed at the idea of Rick Rubin not being able to play any music at all.
I was having a conversation with someone about Rick Rubin a few weeks ago. They were trying to pick my brain about the commonality of all of Rick Rubin's productions. I was like, there is no musical commonality. The commonality is he's like producing people's minds. Like he's producing people's ability to imagine a version of themselves beyond the version that they walked in the door believing that they are.
Johnny Cash, at the end of his career, I think like if you're going to point to a massive change that Rick Rubin instituted in an artist, it was taking Johnny Cash into some very weird, strange, unlikely places at the very end. And that's here. I hate to use the word spiritual, but like that is, there's something guru-esque about that.
The recent run of Fred again, which is to say Actual Life 3, the Madison Square Garden rave and public performance in Times Square with Fortet and Skrillex. And also there was a video, and I don't exactly remember. It was when he had gotten this most recent collaboration with the Streets. And he was playing it for
Big Hen. He's Fred's roommate from Joy Anonymous. Yeah.
Right. So he's playing it for Big Hen. Again, not to be cheesy, but the look in his face, knowing what he's about to drop on him, and then the look on Big Hen's face when he realizes what is being shared with him. I was like, look, I've been doing this a very long time. I'm a profoundly, deeply cynical person. Like at this rate, you know, it's hard for me to like watch a moment of artistic like blossoming and just be like, that's real.
The weathered heart of John Caramaca.
True. But I watched that and I was like, these motherfuckers are really feeling it. They're feeling it.
They are.
Has that capacity for connecting with people interpersonally. Do you sense from having talked to him that he understands that has to play an increasing role in his music, in his presentation, very simply because the stakes are higher, the people he's working with are better known? Like is that now implicitly part of the art?
I don't think he ever intellectualized it to any degree like that. I think it's pretty holistic. I think it's like he's always been making music with friends and with the people around him. And so his ability to get those performances out of people and to get that collaboration with people, I think it's just part of it all. I don't think he puts any weight on it. I think it's just comes so naturally to him, which it's like saying, you know, it's like nobody would ever call themselves a great friend. You're waiting for other people to say that.
I'd call myself that.
Fair. Well, I would call you.
I think
that.
I think it's a known thing. I think that's what they say about me on the streets. That's like a known thing.
They do say that about you on the streets.
True story.
I don't know what they wouldn't say about themselves, but I don't think Fred would ever say, I can unlock these people. Like to him, it's just hanging out and making music. And Fortet actually, Kieran Hebden, Fortet, said a really interesting thing to me. He said, like, people are always asking me why I'm not collaborating with a lot of the people who sound like me, which would be like Floating Points or Daphne, aka Caribou. He said, like, for one thing, a lot of those guys, they do the same things as me. So we're happy to talk music and maybe like give each other some pointers here and there. But in terms of real, like getting together and collaborating, I do it based on how I feel in the room with people and whether or not I like what they're about. And it doesn't really matter to some degree what kind of music they're making, whether it's Steve Reed or Madlib or Fred, you know. And somebody paired him with Fred and he was like, we got on. We had a really fun time just hanging out. And the next thing you know, it's like him, Fred, and Skrillex in Pangborn banging out music.
I think this dovetails really neatly with something else that I think is happening a lot in pop music more broadly, which is just the ease of collaboration across genre lines, the expectations that you're going to largely collaborate within your genre is going away. Like, you know, you see reggaeton artists, bachata artists collaborating with rappers, you see rappers collaborating with punk singers. Like, it's sort of like the future that I always thought should happen in like the 90s, but there were so many structural obstacles. Now it's normal.
We got close in the 90s, and this moment, especially in electronic music, reminds me of a very specific moment in the 90s, Madonna's Ray of Light, when William Orbit was moving from the electronica world into the pop world. And some of those transitions were starting to happen and just did not push all the way. In part, I blame rap rock. We can blame rap rock for a lot of things. But
oh, stop. Don't make me talk about the Judgment Night soundtrack. Don't make me bring up the Judgment Night soundtrack on the Fred Again episode. Come on.
Okay, there's one great rap rock record. Sorry.
Obviously, genre conversation is outmoded and we don't really talk about it. But the fact that he does incorporate poetry, rap verses, R&B singing, random snippets of found conversation, how does he think about the through lines between what he is doing separate from those found vocals and where he finds the vocals from. Like, is he thinking of it in the sense of like, I'm branching out and reaching beyond like my natural positionality? Does he talk about it in that way?
We talked about it a little bit, and really it's just what comes across his feed. It really is what strikes his fancy. And I think he's excited to try. Listen, it's crazy. I think he's only got 3 albums out because they came out so quickly, but he really doesn't have that much music out to his own name. Actual Life 1 and 2 really feel of a whole. And 3 is where you really start to see him branch out into these louder, bigger directions. I think it's the most kind of jubilant of the 3 albums. And then you have the USB songs where he is really collaborating with people who are at the top of their game. And he is adding a very distinct element to that collaboration. I mean, I can listen to Baby Again, the song with Skrillex and Fortin on it, the only song credited with all 3 of them. And I can hear the Fred pieces, and I can hear the Skrillex pieces, and I can hear the Fortet pieces. And what he brings to the table with those guys is that real emotional texture that's available in all the rest of his catalog. And I think he's trying to figure out what other places to put that in. But in terms of where he's getting these things and where he's growing them, I think it's just really what gets in his face.
We should listen to Baby Again, because I do think like the Troika, Fred, Skrillex, and Fortet, very rarely am I upset that I miss a concert or miss an event, but like I was upset that I missed that. And I felt like the jubilation was palpable even from a distance, even through the phone, etc. So let's listen to a little bit of Baby Again. One of the songs on Actual Life 3 that I really like a lot, it's called Blue Better With Time. And this is a remix, essentially a reversion of the Young Blue single from a couple of years ago. And to me, what he did with that record, I really, really love the original, like passionately love the original. And the texture of Young Blue's voice in the original version is so unusual. It's so striking. This is his like breakthrough. I mean, he had music out before, but this is his breakthrough song. And it stunned me that Fred was able to like isolate like the specific moment on that song that really, really does the damn thing, take it, like rip it out of the song and build his world around that, using that as like a foundational brick. Could someone potentially have a concern along those lines? Absolutely. And that's why I sort of like nodded to / joked about Moby's play at the beginning. Obviously, the politics of Moby's play are different. A lot of those vocals came from long ago singers who maybe were not totally compensated or not compensated in the right way. I don't know. Tell the lawyers to look at it. Tell Ben Cesario to research it. I don't remember the specifics of it, but I know it's not that. It got me thinking, like, what if this version of that song somehow ends up becoming more popular than the original version? Like, is there something destabilizing about that? I don't totally know the answer.
I guess the way I think of it, and I'm really curious to hear what you think of the Baby sample. For me, it was like, I've been listening to Baby as a consumer of music generally, but hearing that sample in that song made me want to go back and really go deep in.
Oh, interesting.
With a lot of sampled music, maybe this is just me as a music consumer, but I find that so many great samples have introduced me to the music that they are sampled from. And you're going, oh my God, this is amazing too. And it makes you appreciate the core thing more. And I would like to think that many of Fred's listeners would have that curiosity too. Who knows? Who knows?
Perversely, for someone that came up writing about hip hop and in rap magazines and very aware of the potency of sampling, like I was never like a true crate digger. I was always experiencing stuff very much in the present. That's just my predisposition. Like others might feel differently, but I think that's maybe why I have this lens on this music as opposed to the other approach. I guess I'm potentially optimistic that the thing that you are describing could happen, but I don't think it's necessarily a default mode for a lot of people, even for someone like myself who tends to take things pretty seriously.
So what do you think of the Baby sample?
Like, do I think it sounds good or does it trouble me?
Do you think it sounds good?
Yes, I think it sounds good. Yeah. I mean, I think most of this sounds good. That's the thing. there was something uncynical about this music and something uncynical about how I feel when I listen to this music. And again, it's cheesy. It's like if I saw somebody else saying this, I'd be like, that's not a good opinion. You shouldn't say that. That's an elemental opinion. And yet here I am. I find myself saying it. And maybe that's a testament to how effective what he does is.
There's schmaltz there for sure. And one of the first knocks I heard on him from another music producer was on Actual Life 1, and they called it pandemic pop. And they said that it's going to get outdated really quickly. Songs like We've Lost Dancing and these songs about missing, wanting to get lost on a smoky dance floor and yearning for people and yearning for contact with people. In preparation for this, I went back and listened to the entire discography. 3 albums, 1 EP, and the EP he did with Heady One, Grand Rapper. And Actual Life 1, I was really worried it wasn't going to hold up. I was really worried that it was going to be so tied to the moment that it came out in. It still knocks. You can definitely hear that specific moment in time. And Fred has said himself, these, the albums are dated to actual life, like
with
April 2021.
And we should say there are dates in the titles. I did not read all the dates. I didn't read like the longer subhead, but there are dates in each of the titles.
Yeah. And they definitely, you can hear what's going on, certainly what's going on in his world, but then parenthetically, what's going on in the world in Actual Life 1 for sure. I think like the more we get away from it, I think it's going to actually sound really, really good in a couple of years. It still reminds me of that moment. It still reminds me of lockdown, wanting to get out and wanting to get the vaccine, all those terrible things. But those songs still knock, and they really show the promise of what's to come in many ways too. They're also the darkest of his songs. His music is
absolutely. No, you're right. I mean, Actual Life 3, like to me, the freedom, the kind of the scale of jubilation on Actual Life 3 obviously feels materially different from the first one, but also like maybe even a rejoinder to the first one. And a little bit of like I use the same bag of tricks to deliver a completely different set of feelings.
And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about Fred speaking narratively through his music and narratively through these electronic music textures in a way that a lot of other electronic musicians don't. There really is kind of, I don't want to precisely nail it to a 3-act structure, but you can hear some like undulations in tone with a very clear beginning and end. And there's only one more, when I talked to Frey, he said there's only another entry in the Actual Life series. And it's the music that he's been working on with Brian Eno. That's kind of like almost a prologue to the Actual Life series. And then who knows what he's going to do.
Before we pivot to the Boiler Room and NPR set, let's listen to the Young Blue, Blue Better With Time, off of Actual Life 3. The NPR Tiny Desk, which came out not that long ago, and also the Boiler Room set came out a little bit ago. Do those two things taken together feel like two sides of the Fred Again story?
Yes.
They do to me, for sure. But I'm wondering how you receive those two things.
Okay, so the first thing is the Boiler Room set is really what made him explode in America. Summer 22. And when I was telling people that I was working on a profile of Fred, they were like, you've seen the Boiler Room set all over TikTok, right? Clips from the Boiler Room set emerge. And I assume Popcast listeners know what Boiler Room is, but Boiler Room is an electronic music series. And the thing it revolutionized was putting you right in front of the DJ with people dancing behind them. And so you could see the crowd reacting to the DJ in real time. Electronic music just wasn't being given the visual treatment in that way. One of the first big Boiler Rooms to pop off, K Tornado's, watch it is all I can say. Just incredible.
Great narrative happening behind him.
So much. Pure comedy at times too.
Oh, yeah.
And so Fred really made the most of this moment through his playing of an MPC live, but also just like his stage presence and so much energy. And there's one especially like wonderful moment in the Boiler Room where somebody who's dancing right next to Fred, their elbow hits one of the CDJs and the music stops. And everybody kind of boos and yells. And then Fred like wraps his arm around the guy, smiles, grins, hits play, and the music starts again. It's just a lovely, fun moment. But the energy of the entire thing and the catchiness of the music and the various gears he was shifting through made the thing go viral. I think it was in Boiler Room's top 10 most viewed videos after like a couple weeks. And Boiler Room's been on for over a decade now. But that really shows the excitement and danciness and clubbiness that Fred has in his range. And it's at the very end of one range. On the very end of the other range is quiet, emotional, very stripped down Fred. And if you're a fan of Fred, again, you know, Fred has done these performances that he calls actual life acoustic. He'll sit out on his patio and play the kind of stripped down versions of these songs. What he did with this Tiny Desk concert that he also did with Boiler Room, he got the assignment. He absolutely got the assignment. He knew who the audience was going to be. Are you going to play club songs for Tiny Desk? No. It's an NPR audience.
I was reading something where he's like, he taught himself or retaught himself to play some of the instruments that he was going to incorporate. And then also, of course, played the desk, which like, yeah, I guess it's good. It's also a little bit like, wah, wah. Like, I get it, but like a tiny bit wah, wah. Like, let's just keep it a buck. It's a tiny bit wah, wah.
I enjoy a little British cheek every now and then. And that was nothing if not cheeky. He got to the very core of some of these songs in a way. And by the way, I've watched the actual live acoustic performances. He really nailed this one. He really stripped down some of the songs in ways that he hadn't before. And at the end of it, you can see him catching himself. He gets a little emotional and it's a teary, weepy moment. And I am not easily affected in that way. Even I got a little misty.
Let's listen to a tiny bit. I don't even know which segment we're going to do, but let's just listen to a little bit of the Tiny Desk performance because I think it will be instructive to hear after hearing 7 snippets of other Fred Again songs to hear 20 seconds of what this sounded like. Because I found not simply the deploying of sound and playing, but the deploying of silence in this NPR Tiny Desk to be very, very, like really astute. Like it's a very, very careful thing.
He used his NPR voice.
Yeah. He really did. It's really, really careful what he did. So let's listen to a tiny bit from the NPR Tiny Desk.
They want to do me truly, that feel like a blessing. But finding one to love is getting harder every second. I bench press my problems like add another weight and act like it's all right when it's not. Whoa.
Fred Again seems to be a person who, if he chooses, could have 10 singles on the pop charts with 10 different performers in the next year, 2 years. Based on your conversations with him, to what degree is he interested in continuing to do that kind of work, but amplified and bolstered by the acclaim that he has developed on his own? Is he still seeing value in potentially doing a Bad Habits type record? Or is he fully switched over and said, I'm just going to live in my own head now, and my head is taking me somewhere else?
The answer is he's already doing it. And there is already a charting single, at least overseas, with the new Rami Madley Croft from the XX record. He helped produce that entire album with Stuart Copeland, who produced Madonna's Confessions of a Dance Floor.
So he's doing the whole album.
He's doing the whole album. I think there's a little bit of Jamie XX on there too, but it's mostly Fred and Stuart. And it's quite good. If you haven't heard Strong or Enjoy Your Life, which has a Beverly Glenn Copeland sample on it, both great songs.
Also, great old Popcast episode on Beverly Glenn Copeland. Go back and listen to that.
Shout out.
Yeah. But where are his interests now?
He wants to make his own music. I think that's really where it is. And he found a very good collaborative partner in Rami. And I'm sure he's going to pick those up as he goes along. There is a Fred and Fortet song that hasn't come out yet that I would very much encourage your listeners to look up. It's called Breathe Again. And they basically took a J-Lo sample from Real, pitched it up and pitched it down. So it makes it sound like she's doing a duet with herself. You can find it on SoundCloud. It's one song that's credited exclusively to Fred and Fortet. Hasn't come out yet. Might be on the new Fortet album. So that will be coming out. So he's going to work with the people he's worked with. He'll probably find some new partners, but like the new Fred, I think it's going to, once he gets over the Actual Life series and puts that away, I don't know where it goes. And that's super exciting. And the stuff, if I can point to anything in terms of where it is going, it's all the USB stuff. It's all the stuff that has not been on the albums. It's all the one-off stuff that really shows the far reaches of some of that louder range. And I think the Brian Eno Fred album that's probably next up, you probably saw some of that in this Tiny Desk performance, those quieter, those moments filled with silence and those slightly more kind of wavy, to use a word, textures. But yeah, I don't know where it goes next. I'm super excited to see. I hope he keeps making his own music.
We're not necessarily used to, in America, certainly like the idea that like a producer album or whatever, and obviously he's singing as well, but like a producer album is like, could be like a potential huge pop burst, but it's much more of a normalized concept overseas. I don't mean to impose an American narrative on this very, very, very British man. Extremely
Very British.
Very
Extremely.
British. Foster, what a joy to talk about the music of Fred again.
Great to see you. Great to talk to you.
That's our show. Listen to every podcast ever at nytimes.com/popcast. Buy the t-shirt. It's thepopcast.myshopify.com. Also, stickers? ?
I have one of those shirts. They're comfortable.
They're very like good cotton, right? Like solid.
Great cotton.
Great cotton. Like only the finest blanks on the podcast.
And honestly,
t-shirt.
the vertical logo, it's thinning. I'll tell you that. It is thinning.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, like a vertical stripe. Yeah.
Unexpected benefit. I'm happy to know that. Stickers, maybe by the time this episode comes out, possibly stickers on the website. TBD. Subscribe to Popcast anywhere you get your audio content. That's Apple, that's Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever the hell else podcasts are. Get in the Discord, get in the Facebook group, tinyurl.com/popcast Discord/popcast Facebook. Email us, popcast@nytimes.com. Also, mailbag episode coming relatively soon, so start sending those questions in. Our producer, as always, is Pedro Rosado from Headstepper Media. We'll be back next week. Let's go out with Mike Desert Island Duvet, which is The Streets, Dermot Kennedy, and Fred again.
Two people on a carpet couldn't care for what's real.
All that